Well, hi everyone. Welcome to our Thursday Clinical Spotlight. I'm Tracy Jarvis and I'm the director of PESI UK. And back by popular demand, we have the incredible Deb Dana on polyvagal theory. We're going to be talking sort of new insights and essential strategies. If you haven't joined us before, a warm welcome to you. So let's go straight to Deb. Deb, pop your camera on and hi.
Hi, it's good to see you again.
It's so good to see you again.
Mm, we do this kind of regularly, don't we? It's lovely.
It is so nice, and
Mm.
hopefully, we'll get to do this in person at some point.
Oh, wouldn't that be nice? Yes.
It
Yeah.
would be
Yeah.
amazing. So, Deb,
Mm.
we've had over 1,000 people register for this. We've got new people joining us, wanting to know a little bit more about polyvagal theory. Again, I'm going to start off really basically, a really brief recap. What is polyvagal theory?
Sure, sure. I love the brief recap in 5 minutes or less, right? So polyvagal theory is a theory of the autonomic nervous system that was developed by Stephen Porges. And so, wherever we go with this theory, it is with gratitude to Steve that we can apply this learning to clinical as well as our personal lives. And that's important for us to remember. It is a theory not just of working, but a theory of living, right? So I break it down into three organizing principles: neuroception, hierarchy, and co-regulation. So if we take those one at a time, and I usually end with co-regulation, but I'm going to start there because it's so lovely to be with you and to have your energy, your face, your heart energy to share with mine. It feels really good. It's been a time of loneliness for many of us. So even what we've discovered is even online, we feel a nervous system to nervous system connection,
Mm,
which is necessary for us. So co-regulation is a biological imperative, meaning we don't survive without it. And our nervous system longs for that, reaches for that, and also is sometimes feeling endangered by that.
hmm.
Right. So co-regulation has been one of the things that have been greatly impacted by the pandemic. Right. So, human beings are a cue of safety. Your face, proximity, touch, cue of safety has suddenly become a warning to our nervous system. So that's co-regulation, one of the places that I think we're spending a lot of time trying to figure out in this, even as we come back to connection. How do we do that? And how do we help our nervous systems feel safe
Mm,
around that, which takes us to neuroception, which is the nervous system's way of listening. Inside, outside, between are the three pathways. So it listens for a welcome or a warning inside our own body, in our viscera, our muscles, our heart, our breath, our lungs, right? It listens outside in the environment, both the immediate environment, so the place you're sitting, the place I'm sitting, and then outside into the world around us, and it listens between, so it listens between nervous systems,
yeah.
right? So we have people here with us today that I can't see, but I'm hoping that I can send a welcome to them through my nervous system and see what happens, right? That's always our goal, is to send that welcome. So that's neuroception, and that's happening below the level of our thinking brain.
Mm,
So we don't actually work with neuroception, we work with the outcome of neuroception, because it's a biological process that's going on, and I feel it when something changes, and then I can bring perception to neuroception. That's the process that we engage in when we're looking through the lens of the nervous system. So neuroception, and then hierarchy, which is this lovely, we have three basic states that we move through all the time. We have ventral safety regulation, sort of organized enough, safe enough to move through the world, to reach out, connect. And again, I love pathways. So we have four pathways that are available to us when we're in this place of ventral. We can connect to self, to
mm,
others, to the world, and to spirit.
Hmm.
Lovely, isn't it? Yeah.
Mm.
And then when we leave ventral, and this is Steve's brilliant work, this is why it's a predictable hierarchy. There's an order we move through. We're in ventral. I think that's the place our nervous system longs to be and inherently knows how to be and knows how to get to. We just have to uncover the pathways. So in therapy, we're not creating something new, we're uncovering what's there and deepening that connection. So when we leave ventral, because the world all of a sudden feels, dangerous, overwhelming, our next stop is sympathetic mobilization,
Mm.
which we often think of as fight and flight, right? That's the typical way we think of that. And when we move into sympathetic fight and flight, we lose the capacity for connection through those four pathways,
Mm.
right? Not that I don't want to be connected, but my biology no longer allows it, right? It's called emergent properties. The emergent properties of sympathetic are protection through action. It's a mobilized, energized, flooding, disorganized energy place, anxiety or anger, right? Kind of the categories. If that doesn't, if we can't meet the moment from that place of being energized, then our nervous system will take us to the last step on the hierarchy, the earliest state, the bottom of the hierarchy, to dorsal. And dorsal is a system of immobilization where we disappear in some way, shut down, collapse, no energy, going through the motions, but not really here. Even when I always feel it when I talk about it, I can feel it beginning to stir in my system. My voice changes. You might feel it too as we're just
Mm.
talking about it. It's insidious in the ways that it pulls us, that
Exactly.
dorsal experience. So, and the nice thing about knowing the hierarchy and knowing how we travel it is that we also know that when we leave dorsal, we can't return directly to ventral. We have to go through some mobilizing energy, not fight and flight, but some of the mobilizing energy of sympathetic. And so those are the basic organizing principles. And that's really what guides our therapy
Mm.
when we're working with this kind of approach. It also guides our daily living, right?
Mm.
Because I can stop and say, where am I right now? What state am I in? Right? What cues is neuroception getting?
Yeah.
Right? And do I need co-regulation? We also need self-regulation, right? So where am I in that balance of am I missing co-regulation? And I have been, so it's lovely to connect. And when do I need to self-regulate? So what we've discovered is if we have enough experiences of safe co-regulation built up, sort of in the bank,
In the
right?
bank.
In the bank, then we can weather the times when co-regulation isn't available more easily. We can withstand that. I think what we're discovering with the pandemic is that everybody's nervous systems are just tired.
Yeah.
Even people who have had lots of co-regulating
Mm.
experiences in the bank. It's like, yep, run dry. We're really tired now. Yeah.
Mm. So I
Mm,
want to do a little recap because we might have some
good.
people. So we've got this vagus nerve, this wandering nerve, all
Mhm.
the way from the brain down into the intestines. And someone actually said on a group that I was in, apparently, which I didn't believe, they said it ran through the cervix. And I was like, no, that you can't run the cervix. The vagus nerve doesn't run through the cervix, does it? It ends in the intestine.
Well, I mean, if you think about, well, I'm not sure. And if you think about the parasympathetic nervous system, well, we have talked about it being cranial and sacral. And so we're not talking about the sacral aspects of when we're talking about the vagus nerve. So that's interesting, though. We
Mm.
should look that up. Yeah,
Have a
yeah.
look. So anyway, so we've got
Mm,
this vagus nerve. It's a wandering nerve. There's different states that it helps facilitate, sort of that ventral vagal, so that calm, that sympathetic
mhm,
more fight and flight, and that kind of dorsal vagal shutdown. Also
mhm,
responsible for how we interact with ourselves and the environment in terms of
mhm,
neuroception,
mhm.
underneath kind of like our consciousness, so we might pick up something, and it's got that like hierarchical nature that we kind of move up and down that ladder. Did I get it
Yep.
right?
You got it right. Yes, it's lovely. You're good at this. I love it. And because you mentioned the ladder. I put the states on the ladder because that's how I map it with clients. And maps are an important way to get to know, to befriend your nervous system, which is the first step to get to know the states. Now you move through them. So we go hopefully down and up the ladder, not up and down the ladder. We have to turn that on its head, which is great because when we begin to look through the lens of polyvagal theory, we're actually turning everything on its head, right? It's a paradigm shift for the way
Exactly.
that we connect. So we might as well turn the phrase on its head too. We go down and up.
Yeah. Do you no, yeah, I was just thinking, does that rule apply in snakes and ladders? I don't think so. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't know.
So a question that as a clinician myself, I'm often in various trainings, and one of the questions that comes up so often is like, how does polyvagal interface with Dan Siegel's window of tolerance?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question, I actually just I wrote a chapter for a book that Norton is putting out on interpersonal neurobiology and the ways it connects with all sorts of other things. And mine was PVT and IPNB. So
Right.
you know,
And let's so
and
let's
so
so let me just so that's interpersonal neurobiology, right? The
yes,
IMBB.
yeah, and it's really interesting because really interpersonal neurobiology is talking about the embodied brain, which is brain nervous system connection. It's an embodied brain, not just a brain. And
Mm,
Dan's brilliant work with the window of tolerance was a way for people to understand there is this, zone of regulation, or this place where we are regulated enough so that we can engage in therapy. And there are times when we want to be at the edges of the
mm,
window. That's where the therapy can really happen in times where we want to be more anchored in the middle because we want to take in what we've done. So if we
yeah,
translate that to polyvagal theory, the difficulty I had with that, and like many of us, on this call today, and like you, I was trained window of tolerance. I was trained in interpersonal neurobiology before I ever learned
yeah,
polyvagal theory. So it was my language, all my clients, everyone. And then when I discovered polyvagal theory, my problem with the window was the window's in the middle, right? Hyper, which would be sympathetic arousal, is on top of the window. Hypo, which would be dorsal, is under the window.
mm,
And the challenge with that is it makes you think you can go from dorsal to ventral when you can't. The biology tells us we can't. You have to go through sympathetic to get there, which is why I put it on a ladder. I changed the window and I just, did it that way. But the window of tolerance is, in fact, your ventral vagal state,
mm-hmm,
right? It is the same thing. It's just the organization of it is different. And when I started bringing that to my clients, let's take this window that we've been working with for who knows how long, and let's put it in this hierarchy on this ladder instead. It made real sense to them. They made the shift very easily. So, for those of us who are window of tolerance trained, you can put it on a hierarchy and clients go, oh, that makes sense because I don't come out of shutdown right back to
exactly,
feeling safe and okay. And so
exactly,
now I know my biology is taking me on this path
yeah.
from dorsal through sympathetic. So yeah, which doesn't mean the window is not any less useful. It just means, I would put the window on top,
Mm.
right?
And I think also perhaps, it's a kind of an affect tolerance scale as such,
Yeah, yeah.
where the polyvagal theory hierarchy is more of I would say, a working model,
Hmm.
right,
Hmm.
in terms of that kind of clinical application of moving through the different layers.
Right, right. It's as you have the hierarchy, you can track the shifts. You can see the nuance of shifts, which and yes, we want to, I have this um, sheet I call the stress to stretch continuum. We want to stay on the stress and savor side of that, right? So yes, we can work at the edge. We can challenge the nervous system, and then we celebrate that. We savor it for a moment, and then we do it again. That's how change happens, right? And if we
Yeah.
move over the line to stress, then the system will enter a survival energy, a survival state, and then we can't. Therapy no longer works, change no longer happens because your biology won't let it,
Yeah.
right? You're in protection instead. So yeah, if the window of tolerance is more affect, then the polyvagal hierarchy is more it's this embodied experience that clients really understand, because often in the beginning it's wordless, it's without words, right?
Mm.
Because it's a the nervous system, is a subcortical system. It has connections to cortex and of course limbic, but it begins in the brainstem,
Mm.
right? And so oftentimes what's moving in the nervous system is below the level of awareness, and we need to find ways to bring awareness to it. And it's not simply, by my emotion, right?
Mm.
One of the ways is story, right? Story, and in this way of working, we understand that your nervous system state then get feeds energy to your brain, and your brain's job is to make up a story that makes sense of what the nervous system is sending. And
Yeah.
so it's your state that is the underpinning of your story. So
Mm. So let's cycle back because I think you sort of said something so important. You were talking about co-regulation, and I want to kind of go into, maybe your thoughts around the co-regulatory state, but also that importance of the therapist to be holding that ventral, and just sort
mhm,
of polyvagal theories, sort of insights around really how important our own states are as
mhm,
therapists when we're working with another. Do you want to say
yeah.
something about that?
Oh, I would so love to, because again, this is the interesting experience when people come to trainings. They want to know, what do I do with clients? How do I do this? And the first thing is, you have to befriend your own nervous system first. You have to be able to regulate, because if you can't be regulated, you can't offer that regulating energy to your client. And because of neuroception, your client's going to know that,
Mm.
right? So you can't fake it, right? If I am dysregulated, or if I begin to have an agenda, oh, I know where we need to go, and I begin to shape that agenda, my client's nervous system is going to feel that, rather than staying anchored in regulation and curiosity, and working together, where's this going, right? Nervous system feels that immediately. So the guiding question for anyone who wants to, use a polyvagal informed approach is, what does my nervous system need in this moment to anchor in ventral, right? You have to start there. It starts with our system. And then, the next question is, and what does that nervous system need in this moment, right? So, but it
Mm.
always starts here. And that's another paradigm shift for therapists when they come to training. We're taught about therapeutic relationship and attunement and all of that, but polyvagal theory sort of operationalizes that. It shows you how to measure that and how to know whether you are um, offering a welcome, an autonomic welcome, not a voice, not words. It's nice to see you today, might not send a welcome,
Mm.
whereas it's really nice to see you today might,
Yeah.
and I'm in a different state with one or the other. So if I'm just here and it's been a messy morning and I'm struggling to arrive, and I think I can just dive in with my client, they won't know. Mm-mm. Nervous system always knows, and
Mm.
it may not know, it, it may not hear the context or the story correctly. That's what we've discovered, right? So I've had a messy morning, I'm arriving, I'm a little dysregulated, we dive into the work. Your nervous system feels it. Your nervous system is probably not going to say, wow, Deb had a dysregulated morning, and she wasn't quite ready.
Mm.
Your nervous system is going to say, oh, Deb doesn't want to work with me, or she's frustrated with me, or she's angry with me, right?
Mhm.
And sometimes that'll reach your conscious thought, and that will direct a behavior, or a story. And sometimes it stays beneath the surface. And with enough of those misattunements, then something happens inside your system. And I think clients then sometimes leave, sometimes
Mhm.
drop out of therapy,
Mm.
and because they can't make sense, that it's not making sense to them,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Mm.
So, in this way of working, if I come in, it's been a messy morning, my responsibility is to name that with you, right? So, it's been kind of a messy morning and I need just a moment to find my anchor and ventral,
Mm.
right? And maybe let's do that together.
Mm.
And
Mm.
what I'm doing is I'm letting your system know what it's feeling. I'm giving it the context, the true context. And, for trauma survivors, I'm helping a trauma survivor know that, that thing you feel inside, pay attention to it. It's giving you good information,
Yeah.
right? Because you're noticing that I'm kind of not here in the way I usually am,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. And you don't need to know what the messiness was. So I always get that question. Well, aren't you too transparent? I'm transparent about my nervous system. That's what I'm transparent. You don't need to know what caused the messiness. You just need to know that yes, I'm a bit dysregulated right now. I'm gonna find my way to anchor and ventral, and then we'll dive in. Yeah.
Mm. I love how that really speaks to, integrity, like the integrity of the therapist and the integrity to yourself, sort of really walking the talk.
hmm And I've discovered one of the things I've discovered in more trainings recently is it's a huge responsibility as well, right? It's asking a therapist to take yet another thing on, and yet for me it's the most important thing, right?
Yes.
I don't care what you're trained in, right? I care that you understand the nervous system and act in this nervous system to nervous system way, that we bring this approach, and then whatever else you're trained in,
Mhm.
is great on top, right? Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
So we've seen, I mean, I don't know what's happening in the US, but things are looking okay in the UK. People are having the vaccinations, horrendous stuff happening in other countries. I mean, just so,
Mhm.
so sad. Deb, what are you sort of seeing in terms of, I don't know, polyvagal theory and, individual and community recovery? Any kind of insights coming from your colleagues or from Steve or?
Yeah, it has been fascinating. Steve actually did a study. He and the group did a study on um, putting ACEs, the ACE study, the adverse childhood experience, and autonomic nervous system regulation, dysregulation together, and with a response to COVID, which was a fascinating study, and discovered, and the data showed that the most um, important, probably not the right word, but the strongest predictor of um, difficulty was the dysregulated nervous system, not the number of ACEs or the ACEs. So we really have discovered that it is your nervous system that is allowing you to navigate in either more successful or less successful ways, because it is taking us into protection or allowing us connection. And I think individually, I keep coming back to the individual for a couple of reasons, because I feel overwhelmed by the state of the world,
Yeah.
right? And I know that if I anchor in ventral and move through the world from that place, that my nervous system is sending that energy, it's communicating that to every nervous system I pass, whether I'm in direct connection with them or not. And so for me, that is a way I can feel as though I am sending ripples of this safety out into the world. And sometimes that's the best I can do, right? And yet, if I really think about it on a nervous system level, it's pretty profound,
Yeah.
right? Because it can be contagious. Ventral can be contagious, just like sympathetic and dorsal, but ventral can spread. And I pass somebody and I offer them a smile. It may be just the thing they needed in that moment, and then they feel something, right? And then they pass it on. So it's that sort of individual experience that keeps me going. On a larger community, even larger family system, but societal level, I think what we're seeing is large groups of people who are in a sympathetic state of survival, mobilized, either to be filled with fight,
Yeah.
or this active get me out of here. And we see another large group of people who are in the dorsal despair, give up, can't take anymore, can't connect, can't be here, right? And we see this in family systems,
Mm.
right? And in that small group, and then we see it in communities, and we see it in large populations. And what I have been preaching lately is We cannot come to a place of finding our way into change, into being together in a different way until there's enough ventral
Mm,
around to support that, right? Because, and ventral doesn't mean that you're not going to stand up for what you believe in, right? It means you're going to stand up for what you believe in from a regulated place where you have that strength. And your prefrontal cortex, by the way, is working with you rather than from a sympathetic, rage filled fight where you have become a cue of danger to everyone around you. And even if they wanted to listen, their nervous system says, no, danger, right?
mm,
So, we stand up for what we believe in from ventral, and other people can then listen, tolerate. We can
mm,
come into connection and have those incredibly difficult conversations. And from dorsal, it's like I'm not here, so I can't be part of the conversation, right?
mm, mhm,
So, again, a critical mass of ventral, whatever that means, both
mm,
individually, I need a critical mass of ventral. I'm not always firmly immersed in ventral, but if I can have a critical mass so I can move through the world that way. And then we have to have enough people
mm.
who are in that state so that it begins to create that um, place for all beings, right?
I think you make
Yeah.
such an important point. Certainly, what I'm hearing you say is that sort of almost critical awareness of A, what state am I in? And if I'm
Mm-hmm.
in sort of dorsal or sympathetic, how can I get back to safety and calmness in my ventral state?
Mm-hmm.
And the second thing I'm hearing you say is that these sort of, some of the systemic issues that are happening globally and as a result of the pandemic, but not only, that sort of groups of people, if we can sort of see groups of people in these almost three states,
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
the groups, like this group is like a sympathetic group, right? I'm not going to sort of
Mm-hmm.
make any put
Mm-hmm.
out any names, but we can just imagine. I don't know.
Right.
I don't mind naming this. Just think about the police force and racism, right? That's a sympathetic activation with the police force. They're looking for a fight most of the time, and it's being played out on innocent people. So we can kind of look to those sort of.
Right. And if we look again, this is challenging. And I get this is really challenging, but if we look through the eyes of a regulated system at police forces, what do we see? Right? We see people who are um, frightened, endangered. Their nervous system is saying you are not safe, and it's coming out as anger and force and looking for a fight is what we might say, but it comes from a nervous system that's saying you're in danger, right? And we can't change that equation until we can understand what we see as a symptom of a dysregulated nervous system, right?
Mm,
That's what we keep looking for. It's a symptom of a so because I may not, we're all trying to fix the symptoms, right? When we really need to go underneath the symptom and find a way to regulate nervous systems, because then organically the symptoms that we see are going to change and we can work with them differently.
mm.
So yeah, yeah.
Do you have any like I don't really know what's the state in the US and certainly where you are. Do you have any kind of like tips for people? We've pretty much been in this lockdown for 5, 6 months in the
Mm,
UK, and I know we've got people on here from Germany and Italy and Portugal and Spain and various countries going through horrible things. Do you have any kind of like tips for maybe people listening into their bodies to, I guess, check in with themselves around, do I feel comfortable? Do I not feel
mhm,
comfortable? And how they can
mhm.
kind of help, I
Yeah.
guess, develop that kind of more ventral system
Mm,
from being in sympathetic for such a long time.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I use connection for ventral and protection for sympathetic or dorsal. I use safety danger. And for many people, safety danger doesn't work. They need different words. So it could be connected, disconnected, welcome, not welcome. So the first thing I would invite everybody who's listening to think about is, what would your word be for what I say is connection? right? Safe, right? What would you use for a word? And then what would you use for a word that I use for danger, protection, unsafe, right? So start there, and your nervous system is going to have something to say about that, right? Your nervous system is say, "Oh, I don't like safe, danger." I've gotten that a lot recently. It's like, "No, I don't like that." I say, "Great, what do you like?" So
Mm,
start there and come up with just those two categories, because if we start with the two, then the curiosity, when we, listen, right, to what's going on in my world at the moment, so inside in my thoughts, and what I'm doing and what I'm feeling, what's happening in my body, I simply can go to those two categories first,
hmm.
right? So feeling safe, welcome, connected, enough. I usually put enough after that nowadays, because who feels completely, safe enough, welcome enough, connected enough.
Yeah.
Okay, then that tells me that I have a critical mass of ventral in my system, and I can use that, and I can see, what do I want to do from this place. If, I check in, and it comes back, ooh, flavor of danger, or not safe, you know, protected, then I become curious. Is it that state of overwhelming flood of energy, or is it that state of not enough energy to keep me in the moment? Because one is sympathetic, the other's dorsal,
Mm,
right? So that's the next thing to do. And then if it's sympathetic, if your system goes, ooh, unsafe, disorganized energy, don't know what to do, right? It's that kind of a sense that you get when you listen inside. Then um, one of the easiest way to think about it is, you've got all this energy that needs to be organized in some way, so that can be used with for you can use it in a way that is helpful. I we tell people to calm down. And say, no, don't tell people to calm down. We're just going to organize the energy in a different way,
yeah.
right? So that they can then find the energy helps them move. Moving in some way is
Mm,
so wonderful, for coming from sympathetic up to ventral,
mm. And I
right?
love
Right.
how you describe that, like that real kind of movement, into ventral, down to sympathetic, down into dorsal, up into sympathetic, into ventral.
Mhm.
Like it's not something, it's a movement within the system that is
Yes.
always there.
Yes, yes, yes. So, if you can befriend your sympathetic, and later on you can be curious about, what was it trying to protect me from?
Yeah.
Because it got a cue of danger, right? That overwhelmed, but in that moment, oh, sympathetic, how do I organize the energy? How do I discharge some of this energy in a way that is useful, that brings me up, right? So that sympathetic, dorsal's the other experience. Wow, I am feeling in danger, and I can't do anything.
Yeah.
No energy. And then this is where you need to be really, really gentle with your system, right? You need to say, what is a gentle, what's a drop of energy that I might bring back in?
Hmm.
And it for many people, it's imagining doing something, not even doing, imagining, right? Oh, I'm going to imagine that I'm going to go take a walk, right? And just imagining begins to bring a bit of energy back in. Or I'm going to imagine that I'm calling a friend, right? I'm going to imagine somebody's face. If we can actually have that experience, all the better, because those are the gentle ways that we bring energy back in and move through sympathetic up
Yeah.
to ventral. Yeah.
Mm.
So very different experiences, which is why, you first identify, am I, feeling safe or unsafe? And then, what flavor of unsafe, if I'm unsafe, right?
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We
Mm.
have some time. We've got about 10 minutes, and I've been dying to ask you,
Oh boy.
like since we've been online, about kind of any insights and new learning, because I know you're always developing the model. Like, for those people listening, Deb, you are the person who has taken Steve's incredible theory and really broken it down into how we apply it in our practice. Steve is the brain, and you are basically the master. Okay, we've got this. Okay, well, how does this actually work? So
Right.
tell me about just new insights and learnings that maybe you have been like intrigued about the last year. Maybe things have changed, right? How you used to think about some of the things you've been working with. I don't know. What comes up?
Yeah, it is fascinating because you're right. I'm always like, shifting something, changing something, playing with something. And this year of being online has allowed us to really play with things in a different way. I think I think one of the things that has become really apparent to me as we've moved online is the importance of having people understand their nervous systems, because it has brought clinician safety into doing this work, right? Because if we do your map and I can only see you from here up, I have no idea what's going on.
Got my
But the
pajama
question,
bottoms on, Deb.
yeah, right. Perfect. Lovely. And I'm barefoot. So there you go. You
I'm
know,
joking, by the way.
I'm not. But the question, where are you on your map, right?
Yeah.
Or how did that land in your system? Being more explicit about that has been important. And I think going into this, I was still wondering, if we make everything explicit, does that take some of the connection away, or some of the magic away, or something? And I've discovered, no, it doesn't. It takes away the mystery, which I think is helpful, but it leaves the magic, right? And it helps us feel more safe in doing this work. we
Mm,
we have a way that we can check in, so I know, do we need to slow down, or is it okay to go a little further, just by noticing where you are in your map. So that's one of the things that's been really fascinating to me. I think the other thing that I've really been playing with is touch, which seems
mm.
silly to say, but when the pandemic happened, I was just creating a touch workshop.
Wow.
And then I thought, oh, where, that's gone. And yet, um, we have been playing around with self touch,
Mm.
mirrored touch,
Hmm.
um, playing around with creating touch maps. What
Yeah.
kind of touch brings you to ventral? What brings sympathetic? What brings dorsal? And then sharing those maps with the people around you who you can actually, engage in this mirrored touch with. So and beginning to use it with couples, which is fascinating to me, right?
I
the
bet.
the two nervous systems, right? That's kind of where we're going now, is like the individual nervous system. We sort of know how to work with that, but now how do you work with multiple nervous systems,
That kind of
right?
collective, what you're talking
Yeah,
about. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And what happens when in your life, your small family life, it feels like a safe, lovely place, but as you move out of that into the larger world, you get different cues. How does your nervous system hold both of those? I think my iPod's just went off.
I can hear you, but it's a little bit tinny.
All right, how's that now? Is that better?
Perfect.
Yeah, they died. They don't last long enough. They went to dorsal. They just
Just about to say.
yeah. So I think it's been fascinating to look at systems. I think Steve and I are both looking at systems, and how do you change a system, an organization, so that everybody within that system gets the benefit of um, understanding. How to come to ventral, the safety, how to send those cues to employees, to students, to communities, and I think that's really going to be a fascinating place to keep exploring. So
Mm.
hopefully we'll move out into that. Um,
Mm. What I'm hearing you say is that, at the moment, most of the people on, our talks and things are, therapists and counselors and psychotherapists and psychologists and psychiatrists. But what I hear you saying is like how we use it in schools and in families and in different kind of professions, from business to science to, doesn't
yeah,
really matter.
exactly, and people reach out and email and say, "Ooh, would you like to talk about your work in," and fill in the blank for the system, in the business world, in the medical world. And we go, yes, how wonderful. Because if you could change systems, if systems became polyvagal informed, then people would become polyvagal form because they'd be welcomed into that system and begin to understand
Mm.
the importance of befriending and being treated in that way. It's a different conversation.
Yeah, and I think like what you're talking about, that neuroception and how you are aware of your own neuroception, like am I comfortable when I walk into that group?
Right, right,
Am I comfortable when I go for a job interview or I join a group supervision or I find this partner? Like what happens in my system when I join that system? What does my neuroception do? So yeah.
right, right, right. Yeah. And to pay attention to that, right? Our neuroception, I call it our autonomic intuition, right? And it's sending us cues, and sometimes we have to decipher those cues. Sometimes it might be a familiar cue from our past that is activated in the present, and we might want to look at that differently, but we never want to ignore. Right? We
Yeah.
we may not want to just immediately follow. We may want to be curious about, but we don't want to ignore or override. And I think we are trained to do that often, right? And that's another thing that we're really working on with people. What's happening in this moment, and then be curious about it, right?
Mm.
And I think the story of polyvagal is, your nervous system is taking in information, and it doesn't assign motivation or moral meaning. It's simply enacts a response because it feels you're either safe enough to connect or in danger, and brings you one of the survival energies. So, we get away from that story that we humans make about each other and about ourselves.
Hmm.
Mm.
And I think sort of like the tricky question is and I know where you will answer, but like what comes first, because what I was hearing you say is that sometimes, even though we've got a neuroception that might go, okay, that group over there is making my system feel a bit unsafe.
Mhm.
There can be a sort of perpetualization of
Mhm.
then a top-down
Mhm.
rumination of that unsafety. Um,
Yeah, I like to think, there's something familiar about that experience as I look at that group or move towards that group that activates my nervous system into one of those survival states. And, I have that simple question that I write down and give people in this moment, in this place, with these people: is this level of response or this response needed? Right?
mm,
And that brings prefrontal. That's a top-down question that brings some curiosity to your bottom-up experience. So we're always doing bottom-up, top-down, because that's how we can befriend the nervous system and begin to shape it. We information gather first, and
mm,
then we reshape. So absolutely, we need both bottom-up, top-down. But I would say, that yes, the nervous system, neurocepted something, and then you had this response. So yeah.
mm.
Mm.
Say a little bit more, well, just a little bit more before we take some questions around faulty neuroception.
Mm. All right, so I'm gonna start there, and I did this with Steve on some um, thing we recorded. I said I try to be really, really careful about language, so I call it a neuroceptive mismatch.
There you go. I used the wrong lingo. Sorry.
But no, it's fine, but it's a different experience to say faulty or
Yeah,
mismatch.
yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah.
We're always, looking for a way to say there's nothing wrong with your nervous system. But in this moment, a mismatch has been created. And either, your system is getting these cues of danger, and you can't calm your nervous system when in fact there are cues of safety that you're missing, and you don't need that level of response.
Mm,
And that often happens. We see the cues of danger and miss or misread cues of safety. So
mm,
that's a hypervigilant system, or the opposite, that your system is not taking in the actual cues of danger, so you don't mount the defense that's needed. And those are the two sort of mismatches that we work with all the time. So
mm,
the hypervigilant or the dulled unaware, right?
yeah,
And it's simply a nervous system that keeps getting these mismatches.
mm,
Again, we learn from our experience. The nervous system learns, right? It takes an experience, and then it begins to shape in a certain way. So the lovely thing about that is that we can reshape it.
mm,
That's the hopeful, joyful part of polyvagal theory is that we can reshape the nervous system. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Thank you. Deb, we'll go to some Q&A. We've had many questions coming in, and I want to take this first one because I just think this is a really lovely question. You were talking earlier about the embodied brain, and this person says, "Hi, I'm an art therapist, and the notion of the embodied brain is intriguing as I often speak a lot about the embodied image. Could you
Mm.
speak a little bit more about the embodied brain, please?"
I love that. I love the embodied image. Isn't that lovely too? Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So when we think about the human being, all of the systems that are inside our bodies are connected. We tend to think about them separately and work with them separately, and the medical world certainly does that, right? And yet every system impacts the other, right? So we don't have a brain and a nervous system. We have a brain and nervous system that work together, an embodied brain. The brain, is always getting information from the body, right? And in fact, in the vagal pathway, 80% of the energy flows from the body to the brain. 80%. So that's this lovely way that there is a connection. So, be interesting to see what this person what kind of art they would create around an embodied brain, right? And those connections, are important. So we want to always think about every system is in relationship with another system.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Dan talks about that in interpersonal neurobiology, talks about the the need to understand the embodied brain, right?
Mm.
Mind
Mhm.
brain relationships that are working together, and I would add body to that triangle. So yeah, yeah.
Okay. There's been a couple of, I'm just going to talk to a theme that's been running in the Q&A. There've been a couple of, and I know you're not a specialist with children, so I know that, but I think you can talk to this. Just any sort of useful tips for helping children and young people now. Someone says specifically about self-harming, any kind of tips, perhaps in families or
Yeah,
schools or...
yeah. Kids are a wonderful um, population to work with, and they take so easily to understanding their nervous system, right? They get it when you begin to present it. So let me start there. With kids, those three states, I often would have kids actually create three different spaces within a larger space, and then fill that space with whatever feels ventral to them. How does that come alive? And then sympathetic and dorsal, and then move between those spaces, because what we know about the nervous system is that it's not leaving ventral that is the problem. It's leaving ventral and getting stuck in sympathetic or dorsal, not being able to come back to ventral, that causes physical and psychological suffering. So
Mm.
anything you're doing, you want to move between states, right? So for kids, you create these three spaces and, oh, let's go on an adventure and let's move between them, right? And kid therapists are so brilliant at doing all this. Many of them have, you know, um, houses or structures that have three floors. Each one is a different state, three objects, three different stuffed animals. There are all sorts of ways to bring it alive for kids. If you work in the sand, absolutely love creating maps in the sand. The interesting thing about self-harming, and this is true for kids or anybody, again, self-harming behavior is a symptom of a dysregulated nervous system. And then our question becomes, in what way is this nervous system dysregulated? Right? So if we take cutting, cutting might be a symptom of a system that's stuck in sympathetic and needs trying to release some of that energy in some way, right? Or it might be a symptom of a system that's in dorsal and just wants to feel something, wants to bring some life back. So we look at the symptom, and that's our starting point. Let's find out, right? So we never want to take the symptom and then think, oh, I know what that is, right? It leads us into the becoming an explorer around what do we do, where is this coming from, right? What state is bringing this alive for you right now, right? That's really what we're trying to look at, and whether it's a kid or or an adult, and whether it's self-harm or eating disorder or substance use, it doesn't matter, right?
Mm.
Right? It's where is this emerging from? Yeah, because then we know what might we do? What is your nervous system missing? Because whatever it's doing, it is trying to get you to ventral. That's always what the nervous system's trying to do, trying to get you back to safety.
Mm.
Mm,
Mhm.
mm,
Yeah, and maybe you just want to like, talk a little bit about if we just sort of like deepen that. I know with sort of your personal profile maps and your sort of other maps that you do, like there's sort of belief change work involved in those different states. And maybe you just want to say a little bit. I know we haven't gone into any depth about sort of personal profile maps or glimmers and triggers maps or anything, but just so we just deepen the model a little bit, do you want to just briefly talk about that?
Yeah, so in the beginning, I developed a 3 map series, and I still use that. This is the foundation of befriending the nervous system, the personal profile map, where you get to know each of your states and you get to name them because not everybody likes ventral, sympathetic, dorsal. And there are two, once you've sort of identified what happens in your body, what do you think, what do you feel, what do you do, there are 2 statements you fill in from each state: the world is and I am. And those 2 statements sort of bring to life the core beliefs that each state is bringing you. They are powerful to just see and to see how different they are. That's the first map. I do that in the very beginning of treatment. The second map is called the triggers and glimmers map, and that identifies how did I get here. So personal profile says, where am I? Triggers and glimmers says, how did I get here? So the triggers are what takes me to sympathetic, what takes me to dorsal, right? And something that takes you to sympathetic might take me to dorsal. And that's one of the things we learn is we never can assume
Yeah.
because it's so individual to each nervous system. And then the glimmers are what are the moments I find myself in ventral, the micro moments, right? How do
Mhm.
I hear, right? And as therapists, it's important for us to focus not just on the triggers. We
Mm.
need to reduce or resolve the triggers, but we need to bring in and actively experience the glimmers in order for healing to happen. So that's map 2. And then map 3 is the regulating resources map. And we identify for each state in dorsal, both co-regulating and self-regulating, what helps me begin to move out of here. So bring some energy back. In sympathetic, the same, what helps me move towards ventral. And in ventral, what helps me stay here, right? Because again, we want to resource that capacity to be in ventral and stay there a bit longer, right? And we talk about resource. Resource is an interesting word, isn't it? Because for people, a resource might be something they don't want to keep doing all the time,
Yeah.
right? And yet we don't take resources away until the nervous system has something else to bring in because it will
Mm.
just get stronger and stronger. So we play with resources. We play with and when we do that map, we really see an imbalance usually between co-regulating, self-regulating. You can see where the nervous system finds more capacity to engage in resourcing and less. And we don't need a perfectly balanced map, but we want to make sure that there are resources on both sides of that map. So, and once we've done those 3 basic maps, then we have the foundation to work from, right?
Mm. Mhm.
We have all sorts of ways that we engage in therapy, but we do those 3 basic maps first. And even if you're a therapist who's using one of the many other brilliant models, you want to remember any model you are using, you are working with the nervous system. Any model, even if you're a CBT or you are working with the nervous system, right? So we want to remember that, which means to me, I think we should know what the nervous system's doing and how to invite it into this process, right? How to have it be a partner with us. So, everybody has one. It's a common denominator in human experience, and no matter what we're doing when we engage with another, we are working with the nervous system. Mhm.
Mm. Thank you. Okay, so we'll take and again, I'm just sort of grouping together some questions.
Mhm.
So there's a couple of questions around mismatching bipolar and PTSD. Um, let me just have a quick think on this. So, for example, somebody says, like, how would mismatching of the nervous system correspond with a client with either PTSD or bipolar who is reliving those experiences? So, like, their perception, like that kind of bias within the state is almost creating the mismatch. I think that's what the person's saying.
Yeah, so just talk for a moment about bipolar, and yes, there is actual organic bipolar, and many clients come to us with a bipolar diagnosis when it might be a nervous system that dysregulates in those ways, sympathetic dorsal, sympathetic dorsal. So again, I like to be curious, and I like to have a medication provider who will work with us to explore, what actually is going on in the nervous system, and begin to perhaps titrate meds and see what happens. So yeah, bipolar is interesting. And yeah, the PTSD, it's a system that is incredibly sensitive to cues of danger, right? So some tiny remembrance, some fragment of a cue of danger lights up the whole system,
Yeah.
right? And the more that happens, the more sensitive we come to be around that. So, the other thing I would say is that, depending on what's going on in my life, I have more or less resilience, right? So there may be some days when a fragment of a familiar cue can activate my system easily.
Mm.
Whereas other days, I'm much more anchored in ventral, and that same fragment would go by unnoticed. So again, when we have more capacity to anchor in ventral, and have that energy in our system, some of those fragments of cues no longer reach the level of activating our survival states. But yeah, it really is. You think about a noise, a smell, an image, a word, any of these things, a neuroception of danger comes in, and unless we have enough anchoring in regulation, it's simply going to take us where it needs to go. Yeah.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm. So, we can squeeze in one more question. Go on. um, so somebody says, again, maybe we'll just end here because I think we're all interconnected. I wonder if there's a collective nervous system, like a collective unconscious. Do you want to just say a little bit about that, and maybe just related to the pandemic and some of the systemic issues that we are facing, inequality and yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the experiences that we have when we are immersed in ventral, is this sense of oneness, right? That comes where I am connected to you. I mean, scientifically I know this, but in this place I can feel this sense of oneness with others, right? It's a biological experience when that happens. Awe, the experience of awe is a biologically based experience. Your nervous system has a role in that. And when we are in that moment of awe, we feel connected to something much larger than ourselves, right? I think that's one of the things that I've loved is helping people have these everyday awe experiences so they can know I am connected. I'm small, connected to something much larger than myself. We need that in this, and I hope that will begin to help us, connect outward to others who are just around us, not just our group, but
Mm.
walk around knowing, oh, my nervous system is talking to that nervous system. And that nervous system. So in fact, every nervous system is talking to another nervous system, or, around the globe. And isn't that an interesting thing to think about?
Mm.
I had as I was saying it, I had an image, and I wished I was an artist, because wouldn't that be a lovely image to bring to life?
Wow.
All these nervous systems connected. Yeah. Mm.
Mm. Deb, as always, it has been so beautifully rich. Cannot thank you enough for your time today. And to everyone that sort of joined us from wherever you are, all around the world, newcomers as well, thanks so much for joining us. And from me, goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye for now.